All right, so get this. We're diving deep today into a legal battle between Pennsylvania and the Trump administration.
Oh, this is a good one.
It's about a freeze on federal funding that's causing a lot of problems for us. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro says it's jeopardizing billions of dollars.
Yeah. Billions with a B.
Billions with a B, that's right.
It's a lot of money.
And we're going to be talking about the political maneuvering and high-stakes legal arguments. And get this, the potential impact could even reach the 2028 presidential election.
Wow, that's a long way out.
It is, but this is something that could have long-lasting consequences.
Absolutely. Yeah. Pennsylvania was really counting on this money for a lot of different things, infrastructure projects, environmental cleanup.
The works, right?
Yeah, all kinds of stuff.
So we're talking at least $5.5 billion that was committed to Pennsylvania that's now just kind of in limbo.
Just hanging out there.
Yeah, and Shapiro is not messing around. He filed a lawsuit claiming that this freeze is illegal and unconstitutional. He's saying that the Trump administration is violating something called the Administrative Procedure Act.
So what does that mean, like in layman's terms?
Well, it's basically like this Congress approves the spending. They're like the bank, they approve the loan, and then the president can't just come in and say, nope, I'm not giving you the money anymore.
So like he can't just unilaterally decide to withhold the funds.
Exactly. That's what Shapiro is arguing, that the executive branch can't just ignore Congress when it comes to spending decisions.
Got it. So it's not just about the money itself.
No, it's about the principle. It's about who gets to call the shots.
It's about the power dynamics.
Right. And it's also important to point out that this isn't just some abstract legal debate.
Right.
This is having real-world consequences.
Yeah, $5.5 billion is going to have real-world consequences anywhere.
Right, exactly. But the lawsuit gets into specifics about what those consequences are and what some of the things that this freeze is affecting.
So like what kinds of things are we talking about?
Yeah. Well, the lawsuit claims that Pennsylvania state agencies are in a really tough spot. They're having to cover the costs of projects that were supposed to be federally funded.
And they might not get that money back.
There's no guarantee they'll be reimbursed. So imagine you're running a state agency and you suddenly have this huge hole in your budget.
Yeah, that's a problem.
That's a big problem. So what are some of the specific projects that are being impacted by this?
One of the big ones is the cleanup of abandoned mines in Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah. I read about this. This was a major campaign promise for Shapiro.
Huge issue in the state.
Yeah.
They got something like 300,000 abandoned mines.
300,000? That's incredible.
It's a lot of mines. Yeah. And they're a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. They can be safety hazards. They can pollute the water.
So how does the funding freeze play into all of this?
Well, a $3 billion grant over 15 years was supposed to help Pennsylvania's Department of Environmental Protection tackle this cleanup effort. And now that money is frozen, which means projects are stalling. And that's causing all sorts of problems, potential job losses, increased environmental risks. It's a real setback for Shapiro's agenda.
Okay, so that's a pretty clear example of how this funding freeze is having a real impact on Pennsylvania. Are there other projects? Is this the only one?
No, there's others. A lot of the frozen funding comes from Biden's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, too.
So you've got a situation where a previous administration committed these funds, and now the current administration is putting the brakes on it.
Yep.
I'm a bit confused, though, because I know that judges have already blocked the freeze. So why is Pennsylvania still having problems accessing this money?
Yeah, it's not always a simple thing. You know, a judge says yes, and then boom, the money appears.
Right.
There are processes, sometimes appeals, definitely paperwork.
Bureaucracy.
Exactly. And the lawsuit specifically states that even though 2 federal judges have temporarily blocked the funding freeze, Pennsylvania claims the money is still being withheld.
Oh, wow. So the money might technically be unfrozen. But it's not flowing freely just yet.
Not quite.
So it sounds like this whole thing is a real mess for Pennsylvania.
Yeah, you could say that.
So we've got Shapiro arguing that this freeze is illegal and causing real problems.
What's the Trump administration side of the story? Why are they doing this in the first place? Well, their argument is that this freeze is necessary to combat wasteful and potentially fraudulent spending.
Okay.
They're essentially saying they're trying to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars.
So they're saying they're trying to protect our money.
That's their argument, yeah.
But if judges are saying they can't just freeze this funding, that doesn't sound very responsible to me.
Yeah, it definitely sets the stage for a potential legal showdown that could have implications beyond just this one case.
Okay, I see where this is going. We've got Shapiro trying to get this money unfrozen, And the Trump administration saying they're just trying to be responsible with taxpayer money. It
Right.
sounds like this could get pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah, this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
It definitely raises some questions.
How much power should the president have over spending that Congress has already approved?
Exactly. That's a really good question.
And it makes me wonder, is this just a Pennsylvania problem? Could other states face similar funding freezes?
That's the big question, isn't it? If Shapiro wins this case, it could set a precedent.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, for other states to push back against federal overreach, and it could really shift the balance of power.
Between the states and the federal government.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a pretty big deal. So this isn't just about Pennsylvania getting its money back. It's about who gets to control the purse strings.
It is. It's about whether the executive branch can just unilaterally freeze funds whenever they disagree with how a state wants to spend them.
Now, I know there's been some bought about Shapiro as a potential 2028 presidential candidate. Do you think this lawsuit could affect his chances?
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
This case is getting a lot of national attention. And some people are portraying Shapiro as a strong leader standing up to the Trump administration.
Especially if he wins, right?
Oh, yeah. A victory here could be a big boost for his political career.
Okay.
But even if he loses, just taking on this fight could appeal to voters who admire his willingness to, challenge powerful figures.
So it's a bit of a gamble, but it's one that could pay off if he plays his cards right.
Exactly.
It's funny. Whenever I hear about abandoned mines, I always picture those old Western movies with the rickety wooden structures and the mine carts rattling through the tunnels. It's crazy to think there are so many of them just sitting there leaking methane and polluting the water.
Yeah, it's a serious problem, and one that's not going away anytime soon. It's going to take a lot of time and money and effort to clean them all up.
And this funding freeze is just making things harder.
For sure.
Okay, so we've talked about the legal arguments, the political implications, the environmental impact, but what does all this mean for the average person in Pennsylvania?
Well, for starters, it means that some important projects are going to be delayed or even canceled.
Oh, that's no good.
No, it's not good. It could mean fewer jobs, more pollution, less progress on issues like climate change, and it also means that Pennsylvania taxpayers are going to be footing the bill for projects that were supposed to be federally funded.
So it's not just some abstract legal battle, it's something that could directly affect people's lives.
Absolutely, and it's a reminder that these kinds of political fights have real-world consequences.
It's interesting to think about this case in the context of the current political climate. We're so divided as a country right now, and it seems like every issue gets turned into a partisan battle.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenging time. There's so much mistrust between the two parties, and it makes it hard to have a reasoned conversation about anything.
Yeah, it feels like everyone's just digging in their heels and refusing to compromise. And this lawsuit seems like another example of that. You've got the Trump administration on one side and Shapiro on the other, and it feels like neither side is really interested in finding common ground.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the back and forth, but what we really need are leaders who are willing to put aside their differences and work together to solve problems.
Well said. And speaking of working together, shouldn't the federal government and the states be partners in tackling these kinds of issues? I mean, climate change infrastructure, abandoned mines, these are all things that affect the entire country, not just one state.
You're absolutely right. These are national problems that require national solutions.
Yeah.
But when you have this kind of tension and mistrust between the federal government and the states, it makes it much harder to find common ground and work together effectively.
It feels like we're stuck in this cycle of lawsuits and political maneuvering, and meanwhile, the real issues are just getting worse.
It's definitely a frustrating situation, but I think it's important to remember that there are people on both sides who are genuinely trying to do what they think is best for the country.
Okay.
The challenge is finding a way to bridge the divide and start having productive conversations.
So what's the solution? How do we get out of this mess?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
I don't have all the answers, but I think it starts with building trust. We need leaders who are willing to listen to each other, to understand where the other side is coming from, and to find common ground. We also need to be more informed as citizens. We need to understand the issues, engage in thoughtful dialogue, and hold our elected officials accountable.
I agree. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of all this, but ultimately it's up to us to demand better from our leaders and to create a more constructive political climate.
Absolutely. And we need to remember that we're all in this together. We're all Americans, and we all have a stake in the future of this country.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture implications of this lawsuit, but let's bring it back to the legal battle itself. What are some possible outcomes here?
Well, the most obvious outcome is that Shapiro wins and the funding freeze is lifted. That would be a major victory for Pennsylvania and could set a precedent for other states challenging similar actions by the federal government.
And what about if the Trump administration wins? What happens then?
If the Trump administration prevails, it would reinforce its power to withhold funds from states, potentially giving it more leverage in policy disputes.
So the stakes are pretty high here.
They are.
This could have a ripple effect across the country.
Absolutely. This isn't just about Pennsylvania. It's about the balance of power between the federal government and the states, and it's about the future of our democracy.
This case really feels like it represents so many bigger issues that, we're dealing with as a country.
Oh, for sure.
And it honestly can feel a little overwhelming sometimes. Like, what can any one person even do about any of this?
Yeah, I hear that it's easy to feel kind of powerless when you're looking at these huge problems.
Yeah.
But I do think there are things we can do,
Like what?
For one, stay informed. We can educate ourselves about the issues, try to understand different perspectives.
Yeah, and you mentioned this could be a precedent-setting case.
Right.
So it's worth paying attention to and seeing what happens. And you talked earlier about holding our elected officials accountable. What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, well, it can be as simple as, contacting your representatives, letting them know how you feel about an issue.
Okay.
You can attend town hall meetings, participate in local government support organizations that are working on things you care about.
Right, and it's not just about, complaining.
Yeah.
It's also about acknowledging when our leaders are doing things that we like, things that we think are beneficial.
Totally. It's about being an engaged citizen and participating in the democratic process.
Yeah, making your voice heard.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the legal battle, the political implications, the environmental impact, what this means for people in Pennsylvania. We even talked about the bigger picture of our democracy, what it means to be a good citizen. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the Trump administration's argument, that this funding freeze is about being fiscally responsible, protecting taxpayer dollars. Isn't there also a valid argument to be made that the president does need some flexibility to be able to control spending? I mean, what if Congress approves funding for something? That's just a terrible idea. Shouldn't the president be able to step in and say, hold on, we need to rethink this?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And it gets to the heart of this balance of power between the different branches of government.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a tension there. On the one hand, Congress is supposed to have the power of the purse.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are elected to represent the people and decide how taxpayer money is spent.
Right.
But on the other hand, the president has a responsibility to ensure that the laws are faithfully executed and that taxpayer money is being used wisely.
So how do we strike the right balance?
That is the question, isn't it?
It really is.
Legal scholars and political scientists have been debating this for centuries.
Wow.
There's no easy answer, but I think it's important to have clear guidelines and processes in place to make sure that any actions taken by the president are justified and subject to oversight.
So it sounds like this is an issue that's not going away anytime soon.
No, I don't think so.
It's something we're going to have to continue thinking about and talking about as a society.
It's a conversation we need to have about the role of the president, the power of Congress, the balance of power between the federal government and the states.
Yeah, these might seem like dry topics, but they really do affect all of us.
They do.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into a really complex issue. Thank you so much for walking us through it all.
My pleasure.
And to everyone listening, we'll have links to all the sources we talked about in the show notes. If you want to learn more, you can check those out. But for now, we'll leave you with this. What do you think about the balance of power in our government? Is it working the way it should? Something to think about as we continue to watch this case play out. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.